Hello everyone, welcome back. So in our previous session we discussed about Alfred Wegener's continental drift theory. We discussed about the arguments which has been given by Wegener, and yes, we also discussed about the evidences provided by Alfred Wegener in order to support theory. And yes, we also discussed in our previous session about the forces which are responsible for the drift of continent. Although the arguments which were given by Alfred Wegener or the reason, or let's say the causes, were provided by Alfred Wegener in order to sustain his continental drift theory, I hope you remember. Wegener cited that pole fleeing force is responsible for the horizontal displacement of those continental masses. Wegener cited that because of the tidal force generated due to the gravitational force or gravitational pull of sun and moon responsible for the drift of continents. However, these two set of forces were ignored by geographers. They reject this claim of Wegener that yes, continent might be drifting, but these forces are not responsible. Forces are too weak in order to justify that in what ways continent might have been drifted over the geological time period. So let's continue with this particular theory, and here we have some sort of flaws in that, though the arguments which were provided by Wegener were somehow, we can say, not justifiable as far as the continental drifts is concerned, not rational as per that particular time. But yes, the evidences which were cited or the evidences which were provided by Wegener, they were certainly correct. They were certainly suggested that yes, continent might be together, but there was a lack of clarity regarding the forces, that what forces or what causes are responsible for the drift of continent. So let's have a deep dive on this particular aspect, like what are the flaws of Alfred Wegener theories, because these flaws will later going to substantiated. These flaws will be corrected in the later theories which we're going to see, and those theories will be post drift. All right, let's begin. So flaws that particular continental drift theory, very first flaws is what, that yes, somehow while looking at the evidences it can be justified that okay, Wagner, we can say that all the continents once connected and now they have been separated, but what was the force responsible for this separation? What was the force which was responsible for the horizontal placement of continent? So regarding this driving mechanism, causes of drift or the driving mechanism, this was inadequately explained by Wegener. As I told you, Wegener cited that continents are drifting because of the pole fleeing force and because of the tidal force. Okay, so that was an inadequate explanation. Why that was an inadequate explanation? Because this pole fleeing force and this tidal force, this pole fleeing force later becomes Coriolis force, and this tidal force which was cited by Wegener, because of that the continents are drifting. These two set of forces are too weak. They are too weak to move a continent. Okay, they are too weak to move a continent, means these forces are not that much aggressive. If we see in the contemporary world, if we see these forces nowadays, these forces are not that much, we can say, having some sort of aggressiveness, or these forces are not that much intense which can drift continents. Okay, so based on this very first argument, the causes which were suggested by Wegener, scientists or geographers stated that Wegener, the causes which you have suggested, they are not fair enough. So based on these, what we can say, your theory is not correct. However, they acknowledge the evidences which were cited by Wegener. All right. So there is a one more argument, or there is a one more flaw in this particular theory. I hope you remember, like we reference of Seial and Sima and Neife. That was the interior arrangement of our Earth, and that arrangement was taken as a reference in the Wegener's theory in order to justify that how the continents are moving. So I hope you remember, in the opinion or in the words of Wegener, he stated that it is Seial who is floating over Sima. However, both are what? Rigid block of rocks. Now, technically, suppose if there is a movement in a one layer, so there will be a friction which will going to generate it among the Seialic rocks and Sima rocks. These rock blocks, if there is a floating, so in that case of floating, there might have been a friction which is generated, and if the friction is generated, then how and why continent. Now that classification in terms of core, mantle and core, that is the modern classification based on the seismic studies. Okay, but Wegener stated that interior of our earth is divided into the three concentric layers in terms of Seial, Sima and Neife. Okay, so interior classification was different in that particular Wegener's theory. So geographers stated that based on this flaw, that there is not possible to move these rock blocks without generating. So scientists stated that free floating, because Wegener stated that the Seialic layer is free floating on Sima layer. That was the assumption in Wegener's argument regarding the that how Pangia split into two parts of Gondwanaland and Long. Free floating is not possible without friction. Seial and Sima layer, they would going to, there is a movement in either of layers, so there will be. But Wegener stated no, free floating. That is what flaw Wegener. Then yes, there is a one academic hindrance during Wegener's time period. That was like during that point of time, nobody tried to. Everyone have a free mindset. Continents are static; they are not while they are. So this actually resulted in kind of a mindful, or you can say academic acceptance. There was no academic acceptance to this new idea posted by Wegener. We all believe in a particular concept which has been provided, which even or sometimes which has been written in our text. Okay, so believe, I mean, during that point of time, Wegener's colleagues believe that continent static. And when you are actually saying a contradictory ideas to those colleagues, they actually denied that no, Wegener, I not quite those taking. So there was a popular belief that continents are permanent; they are not mobile. This actually resulted into non-academic. There was no academic. There was no academic regarding this. Then yes, we have seen in our last session that yes, the continents are, I mean, especially the Africa coastline, especially the western Africa's coastline can be have a particular fit with the eastern part of South America's coastline shoreline, but it's visually convincing when you see landmass at a very broad scale. Then it's but technically it's not. I mean, visually, if you see the distance between the two stars, the sun and star night, you might have a one star here, and we have a star here, and map in by looking at the sky. So that is what visually you can say that okay, the distance to star is not too. Okay, that is star is maybe millions kilometers. Okay, so this Similarly, this continental drift theory, as far as the fitting of this jigsaw fit, or let's say the fitting of these coastlines are concerned, they are just visually convincing. You see at a very narrow scale, if you see at a Brazil level, for example, so there are lots of land masses there. So it's just visually appealing. It's just visually convincing. It's not, perfect fit. That you're just putting a broad factor, broad theme. You are putting broad trend as far as the coastlines are concerned, but you are not focusing on the means coastline of Brazil, it any part of contemporary. So the six of it was particular perfect, just a visually. So it was also one of the, you can say, flaw this particular Alfred. Moving ahead,